So, Michael Fitzpatrick, what an amazing opportunity to hang with you on the phone and talk a little bit about what you do. Um, because when I experienced your sonic expression with that quote unquote golden cello, as you call it, it really was a musical experience that I'd never had before. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about it. And let me begin by asking you.
Hmm.
Well, before I even do that, let me just highlight a couple of things. You're a virtuoso cellist, and I guess among other awards and accolades, you've received the Prince Charles Award for musical excellence. That's pretty epic.
Hmm.
And 20 years with the Dalai Lama. I know you even recorded with monks and caves, and
Hmm.
this quote
Mm.
that the Dalai Lama said about your music. I'm going to say it now because it's pretty mystical. The
Mm.
emotion induced by Michael Fitzpatrick's music is so powerful. It seems almost verbalized. His sound is clear light. Man, that's pretty impressive. And
Mhm.
when Gazina Thompson, a legendary architect in her own right, she had introduced me to you, and the
Mhm.
way she introduced me to you, she said she'd been trying to connect with you for 10 years, and here
Mhm.
you were in L.A. at this
Mhm.
epic moment of opportunity. Can you come visit us in your studio? She asked me. I said, "Oh
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely." And of course, her description of you is pretty simple and straightforward, which was he opens the heart chakra with
Mm.
his instrument. I said, "Wow,
Mhm.
okay." Well, I live in LA, so that's,
Mhm.
there's a lot of healers in LA with that kind of title. So part of me was like very curious to
Mhm.
see.
Skeptical.
Yeah, it's almost on every other business card in LA for
Mhm. Sure.
healing capabilities has that moniker, and
Mhm.
but my practice as yours is to keep an open mind and
Mhm.
not fall into the trap of judgment.
Mhm.
So, well, that is exactly what happened when you came and played for us. So
Mm.
I'm very excited to talk to you about your journey. And my first question for you is, what's your origin story? Like, where were you born and raised?
My origin story. Well, that's those could be metaphorical, meta-literal questions, I suppose, but I'll answer literally. I was born in Columbus, Ohio, moved to the small town of Yellow Springs,
Mm.
which is about 5,000 people. It was the heart of Antioch College. And this was late 60s. So I was 5 or 6 years old. But we were hippie kids in a hippie village, but my parents were not hippies. They were from, Paris in the 50s, black and white, right within the frame. And so that was good to have that kind of a classical um, um, understanding. And I started playing cello in Yellow Springs. Then we moved to Kentucky the following year, and then there was a phenomenal cello teacher at the university named Rodney Farrar, who had about 30 young cello students, and we were just like cello athletes. We didn't know, we just played, and he was brilliant in organizing us, and that's how it all began.
So you were raised and trained in a very classical sense.
Sure, you
That's
have to be.
incredible. Right,
I
right.
mean, it's impossible to play that thing otherwise. I mean, it's impossible enough as it is.
And what was it that gravitated you towards the cello specifically?
Well, it was not supposed to be the cello. It was supposed to be a gold flute, which my grandmother Rose had found a great deal on in New York. She was an incredible concert pianist, and so I thought, sure, I'll. She was going to buy me the flute. I was supposed to take lessons. I thought, why not? And Mom went to the local music teacher, Mrs. Mullins, who taught literally every young music student in Yellow Springs. And she said, look, we got way too many flute students. We don't have enough cello players. Would your son consider playing the cello? So my Jewish mother came home making the executive decision with a cello and a burlap sack, and that's how it started.
Amazing. So it wasn't induced by your fantasies to be on a rock and roll stage. The cello
Man,
was.
didn't no, but my musical debut, oddly enough, was a year prior, where I was singled out by the music teacher in third grade to sing a solo from the Broadway musical Carousel. And so that my first experience being on a stage making music was vocals, which was
Radical.
more interesting. Yeah, totally.
Well, I know I got a chance to actually jam with you at the Earth Star Creation Center recording studio in Venice, LA, and it actually felt like you were Robert Plant on that cello. I mean, it was Viking Zeppelin energy
Excellent.
mixed with some form of interstellar consciousness communication. I mean, it was radical. It really was. And you describe your cello to me. You call it the golden cello. It's interesting that your grandmother's flute was called the golden flute.
You got it.
But you tell me again, because it's really a fascinating story about this singular instrument that you utilize to deploy this sonic experience, which really is unique. I mean, why don't you just tell me a little bit about that golden cello?
Sure. Well, the snapshot is it's basically a brand new 300-year-old cello that slipped through time. It never got played, but the wood dates back that long, and it was finished. It was bought in parts. Nobody knew what it was except my luthier, who I got it from, who was a friend of my grandmother's friend. So that you have to have these kind of internal connections when you're dealing with rare instruments. It's just because you need guidance. And the fellow that I bought it from, he bought the pieces because he knew what they were. And
what does that mean? When he knew
that means, like, if you had a guitar, an acoustic guitar, and what little I know about it is they would, there's a top to the guitar, which is one sheath of wood, and then there's a back to the guitar, and then it has ribs which connect it. So the pieces for a cello would be the same, top and back. And traditionally what they would do, you've seen those photos in Cremona of the violins on the clothesline where they would soak up sunlight.
Right.
Usually that curing process could take 2 months, 3 months max. But as the legend has it, these pieces hung in the shop window of this renowned luthier shop for decades. And then got sold off when they moved their shop out to Long Island. So they went through a curing process that no wood would ever go through. And essentially when the sunlight is reaching the wood, it alters the structure of the wood. It alters the molecules. So my theory is that it got crystallized, that the wood became a kind of a crystalline, like a crystalline resonator that was more able of carrying more subtle frequencies because of the way the wood had been wood fired by the sun. It was fascinating.
Right.
So then my luthier, he put a signature golden varnish on it to go. What he knew he knew the instrument was going to sound amazing, but he just didn't. Nobody knew what it was going to do because it had never been put together. Right. Again, this is unheard of. The lineage of the makers that originally started it goes back to Stradivarius. So my theory is it's the missing Strad, except it slipped through time. And to me, the important distinction is nobody else's vibes ever went into the wood. Right. So there's no other cello player's vibrations in there, which it's an issue. I've played other instruments, fine instruments, that you can't find your own sound because you hear these other cellists sound in there. Right.
And that's a 300-year-old cello in essence, but never played by anybody else. Almost kind of like not influenced by their almost. I don't know if karmic is the right word, but their personality or their frequency of signature. I mean, I know we're talking about resonance, and on so many levels. And I love this aspect of the golden cello being crystallized by the sun's light. It's
Hmm.
pretty unique way to describe an instrument.
Hmm.
And it leads me to the next question, which is really the heart opener,
Hmm.
which is this heart opening chakra capability. Now, when someone says something like that,
Hmm.
it's hard to comprehend what a person means by it. And I know
Hmm.
language has its limitations. I can attest that being in the presence of you performing it live, I I and the 6 or 7 other people that were there that day certainly described the experience as if the entirety of reality in urban Los Angeles, with the backdrop of planes flying over, ambulances going by, dogs barking in the background, as because we were in the outdoor space of the back studio, and
Hmm.
somehow the vibrational nature of what you were doing with that cello seemed to bring it all into a unified, synchronized, harmonious state of resonance, music,
Hmm.
and without deploying a conscious meditative practice per se on our part,
Right.
it was as if the consequence was as if I had been meditating for 20 years. I mean, we were in this when the music stopped, we were all looking at each other as if we were on cloud nine.
Hmm.
It's hard, it's very difficult to describe in words what that experience is like, but it was very definable, and we all could relate to the fact that we recognized this phenomenon took place. And I'd love to hear how you do it, or how do you describe what takes place with this golden cello and this capacity to open a heart chakra, especially since this is all about the heart. I mean, that's
Hmm.
my interest and exploration, so I'm loving to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I think the fundamental component of it is the actual sound wave, right? And once the sound wave, so the sound wave basically follows one's intention, right? So if you put your mind on in a certain emotion or memory or purpose, the sound wave is going to transmit that, right? That's assuming you've sort of worked out your sound wave, which is a whole lifetime to get. As Miles Davis said, he said, I've been working on my tone all my life. It never ends. And so but what you're seeking to do is get into what one brilliant writer, George Leonard, who was an Aikido master, described as the silent pulse. And so to get to the silent pulse, you have to get silent, right? And to quiet the mind. And that takes, everyone has a different way to do it. The way that I found most beneficial for my particular system is as much time as possible in nature and sitting in silence, so that things can literally quiet down in the mind, so that the heart can then open. And then if the intention is to send love, then the sound that's going to emanate from the instrument will carry that, will transmit that. And another aspect of it is there are these Schumann resonance waves that encircle the planet, in a sense like a sonic aura, basically. And those oscillate at between 7.8 and 8 cycles per second, which is considered to be the ideal vibrating rate, the vibrato rate of the great musicians of the 20th century. And they've analyzed it, and they found that their vibrato, whether it was a singer, whether it was a cellist, whether it was a violinist, it all did this kind of wah, 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 wah. It had that signature to it. So I did enough sort of reading about it many, many years ago, and then I have sat for extended periods of time just with moving my bow across the string to get that wah, 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 wah thing to happen
Mm.
on whichever notes that it once the process starts. There's not a whole lot of intellectual engagement with it. There's an enormous amount of sensing into the sonics sensing into the feeling of the field of who you're playing to or for, and the space that you're in, the physical space. Is it a resonant space? Is it not a resonant space? And then if it's not a resonant space, then you can alter the wah, 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 so it's a little wah, 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 so it fills it a little bit differently. Other spaces I've been in that have long decays, like the Abbey that we recorded in had about a 6-second delay in it. So you just touch a note and it just goes on its own, because the whole cathedral is resonating for you. And that was, I'm certain this was the way music was experienced back then. Right now we have reverb, thank God. So we can use the reverb, but there was a gulf, and the classical music establishment got sucked into it when reverb wasn't really in vogue, or people thought it was faking, that it was a cheap utilization. It's like, no, it would just be like if you had an old photograph that, you know, it was just the contrast was not right, and it had cracks and stuff in it. So you scanned it, you imported it into Photoshop, and you cleaned it up. All right, so now we have these incredible tools like you guys showed me, where you were able to put my cello sound inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid in Giza. Right. That's crazy stuff. Crazy.
Right.
Yeah. So, but ultimately, it comes back to, how do you play the cello? Why are you playing the cello? What is its purpose? What is it for? And if it's not to touch people's hearts, then do something else.
There's a word in the Japanese martial arts, shuhari, that comes to my mind, and it kind of references these 3 stages of development, and I'm getting a parallel to you, and I'm curious to see if you recognize or identify with this. The first stage is training in the classical discipline. So whatever the master demonstrates, your objective is to perfect to the best of your abilities. And I guess that's your foundation as well. You were talking about learning the cello from a very classical structural standpoint, as I guess Beethoven, Mozart, and all of that, right? Would you?
It's less about that, and it's more about the actual craft. I mean, if you're mentioning the Japanese martial arts, that's coming to mind is the long sticks that they fight with. I forget what they're called.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a whole way that you do that.
Right.
That is really sophisticated.
Right.
And it takes decades to become a master, or Zen archery, or whatever it is.
Right. That's right. The technical, and it's kind of like, to parlay that into the visual, it's kind of, you could say Picasso followed that as well. His early works are very reflective of his technical training origins. But then the stage 2 is where the artist begins to depart from the technical process that they were trained by and enter a second stage of innovation, where they begin to develop their own style. The third dimension to this 3-part process, which is where I really see the metaphor for you, is when the artist enters a transcendental or transformational stage. And I can really see that arc with you. And what comes to my next question for you is, for example, when you played for us in the back studio here in LA, was that, now, would you say the equivalent of that transcendental state? Was it completely improvisational? Were you referencing memory in terms of a notary system, or musical, playbook? Like, where did that resonance, that sound, that musical composition come from?
Well, it came from the cave. That was the first music that got sounded when we made the descent with the Tibetan monks and the Trappist monks back at the turn of the millennium, at the summer solstice. That ended up being the Compassion CD with the Dalai Lama. And that was the invocation of the earth, was how we started the whole thing. And
Invocation of the Earth. Okay, you've
Right.
captured my intrigue here. tell me
Yeah.
tell me what the why the composition is given that name.
Well, because that's what we were doing. We were going into the womb of the earth to, ideally, with the intention of tuning the planet. I mean, being tuned and then tuning back. So we were receiving the energy of the interior of the planet, which we never think of as the planet having an inside.
The
But
womb. You said the womb.
once you're in that cave, man, you're just like an ant.
This is a large cave you're describing it as.
Is 400 miles of cave
Oh, where is this?
in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky.
Wow.
It's the largest cave system in the world. It's a United Nations World Heritage Site, and it's a trip. So it just became, I mean, it was just like clear that the only way to start the thing, which was an invocation of the earth, of the voice of the earth. And there was no way to compose that in advance, because that was the whole point of the exercise, was to go find out. So I went down, and the camera crew was waiting, the audio guys were rolling, and I just started. And that's in essence what came through. It was a lightning bolt when it unfolded. And over time, it found the form that you heard it in that day. I've never written the notes down on a piece of paper. I never will. It just lives and breathes. That one was the way it was for that moment. That's it. It'll never be like that again.
Well, incredible. So in a way, it's a fusion of it's almost like a mantra that was given to you originally at that point in time, and there's a signature relationship. I guess, is it a sonic pattern that comes back that you are able to say this has its origins first coming through you at that cave, but in a way it has its own qualities to it? For example, today at that point in the LA moment, but you can link it to that as being the same portal mantra. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying?
I could say that. There's a bunch of nested themes in there. There's a Hebraic theme. There's a Native American theme. I have no idea where they came from, other than from the ethers. Okay, I didn't think a single note of that piece up myself.
Right.
I don't know even the night when it crystallized into its form. It's just some giant mystery, and I remain in awe of it, because it's its own thing, right? So whenever I play it, wherever I play it, I always anchor back into the cave, because that's my plumb line, and then I let it loose.
Now,
and then
go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that was it.
So now, if for a musician who could be listening to this, let me pose the question this way. So when you, because your chord technique is really a beautiful mirror to my approach to creativity. I knew we had semblances, but I didn't realize it was that transparently mirror, which is whatever practice you utilize to bring the mind into an open, clear state, and then likewise open the heart and tune it to a frequency of compassion or unconditional love, and then your intention is to essentially bridge the consciousness or the world through transmission of a love frequency of sorts that unifies through resonance. Now, this central technique, now let's bring it to your musicality, your origin training. You're now in LA. Have you transposed that original experience which came through you, not from your own intellect per se, but are you now, because you have a root foundation mastery of music, are you now reactivating that by knowing what those notations are, or are you simply returning back to that open state and that sonic experience is returning? I'm wondering if you're using your memory of the intellect to access the chord, or is it a note structure that defines what that is, or is it something beyond that even?
I, I am still perplexed by it.
Mm.
Having a It was a great movie called The Last Mimsy. It's kind of a Disney kids film, but they find this strange object. But it's just imagine a buckyball, a geodesic dome that's a sphere, and it's turning, and you keep looking at it, and you're looking at it, and you're like, how does it work? Where is it coming from?
Right.
And there was a moment in the Compassion project involving the cave. It was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years in, and I had built these really cool, they're called Icoso kits. And it's essentially a large, and it's like pickup sticks, and you connect them with these little rubber circular collars, and you can connect all the sticks, and you make this outer sphere that looks like geodesic sphere, Epcot Center sphere.
Mm.
And then in the inside, you've got a collapsed version of that, where the pivot, the rivets go in.
Is this Buckminster Fuller type structure, geodesic?
Yeah, it's totally. And then the inner structure is suspended in the exact center of it, and then you hang it. It's like a mobile. And they're fascinating because they seem to turn on their own. It's really trippy. I don't know how it works, but you look up, and all of a sudden the thing is turning. And I've used it as a device, as a visualizing device to look at the project from different angles, right? And I would just sort of place, I don't know, let's call it logistic challenge number 1 in one of the triangles, and then I would just sort of stare at it. And there was a moment it took 3 years to produce the whole recording, but it was 3 years of pre-production, I should say. And there was a moment when I looked at the sphere and I could see the entire, the entire project mind had formed, right? And this was a perfect representative model of it. So to the degree that, here's what's happening. I'm simultaneously working on my craft and building new patterns to the best of my ability, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not jazz, to be perfectly clear. That's not in my ear. I don't hear jazz. I was never drawn to it. I have great respect for it, but it's just not what I hear. I'm still learning what I hear, and the laboratory for learning that's the most powerful is in the recording studio, like when we played that night at Earthstar.
Right.
So at that point, then you open up the sonic codecs, and then you wait for it to start. And the is capital I, capital T. Right? There's no name for it, right? It's the wordless name. But you wait for it to start, and what has gotten developed over the years, it started as this wild phenomenon. It's still a wild phenomenon. It feels like a tube comes down from the heavens, and it goes into my right ear, and the notes then simply pour down, and I play what I'm hearing. And by staying centered to the best of my ability, and I know that by staying in that state of consciousness, everyone that I'm in the recording studio with will automatically entrain to it and do the same thing. They will play their part that they're hearing, even though we're listening to each other and we're playing off of each other, right? So basically you create a clairaudient space out of your own intention and also out of your experience. And what you're carrying now in your awareness field, and you get to a certain point where, whether it's a bad day or whether it's a so-so day or whether it's a good day, your frequency has been attenuated so diligently, right? So with such full effort that no matter the state that you're in, the cello it will pull you back into the resonance. Okay, it's like it locks you back in, and it's kind of like when the athletes, when that moment, and I think of Jordan he would have 3 quarters where he couldn't hit a shot. And then in the fourth quarter, he would go into the zone. He would just make a decision he was going to take over the game. And it's something along those lines. I actually felt it at one point when we were in our session there, then in that Zeppelin section. I was like, oh, yeah, we're going to drive this thing now. Right. And I was really happy with myself because in the past, sometimes I haven't been able to rhythmically like alter or sort of punch through, which is partly the limitation of an acoustic cello that is amplified but not enough, for example, right? And the sound in that session was great. The volume, the levels were all just right. And so that made it a lot of fun. And I remember hanging out a lot in the lower register, more in sort of the bass area. But to answer your question fully, I have no idea what I'm doing.
I love it. I love it.
Right.
It's returning back to my origin roots with martial arts as a self-development tool. Masters always described this importance of holding a beginner mind as you tack on the years. It's so easy to become 25, 30 years into an instrument or a skill set, whatever it is, a paintbrush, a camera, and then hold a moniker of expert. And somehow it can be very disastrous to the creative process because it's an automatic shut-off switch to that open state of mind, you might say. And to hold that I don't know mindset after 30 years takes one of those fundamental core training components, which is that humility or that humbleness, to always be in that open learning state. I guess in terms of our conversation, it's literally a receiving, like an antenna capturing signals, unfiltered or unadulterated by the mind's own interpretive issues, judgment, opinion, perspective that may alter the signature or the frequency. Or completely block it altogether, speaking creatively.
Right.
And it's so true, like in that setting that night at Earthstar, you're on a cello, which is an unusual partnership to a full-blown rock and roll drum set, electric guitars, and keyboards all plugged in. You're thinking it's no contender. And what really happened was, it was as if we were Vikings rowing on a ship through a wild ocean with stellar waves. I mean, it felt magnificent, like the call of the Valkyrie. But in this, I mean, I remember afterwards we were just high on life. The energy that went through us. I mean, it was magical. It really was. Yeah, it was beautiful, beautiful experience. I'm in awe, man. I really am.
Well, and just to add, because I think it's the truth. That energy is who we are as human beings. It's foundational, and then it just the stress of getting through a day in L.A. traffic or New York City subways or whatever, man. It's like you got to defrag from that, and there's nothing that I know of right now in the immediate pop culture mass consumption market that is allowing this to come forth and give it its proper place as a nutrient.
Right.
That is us, right? There's other ways to say it, but that's changing because these sounds, these vibrations wouldn't be coming through unless it was. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius 2.0 or Magical Mystery Tour 2.0, right? This is 2.0 time, and that's a news flash. Right. And those of us that are putting our ear to the rail and quieting our mind as best we can and attuning our heart to nature really is the guide here, which is the earth. But then it gets wonky when you say the earth. So it's like, just just like marvel at nature. That's enough to blow your mind.
Right.
And then listen to all of the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, and you'll never recover. Right. And so that's what I've been doing as of late. Is as the leaves blow across the lawn here. This is awesome. That I've gone into the entire catalog that exists in recorded music. There's a incredible Netherlands Bach Society that's doing all of the pieces on the original instruments, but you talk about revelation. And I've been fascinated by the coding of his numeric sequences. People always say, oh, he was always very mathematical. It's like, yeah, that doesn't describe it properly. These were numerical sequences that permutate like Fibonacci spiral, like Escher drawings, like, the never-ending pi. It's the infinite abacus of sonics.
Beautiful. That's you're really. It's the signature of a being who's essentially doing what we're talking about here, tapping into higher states of consciousness to allow a download of sorts into the collective human cultural space. And I, as a fellow creative artist, it just keeps reoccurring to me this message that in my life on this planet, there's never been a time I was more aware that the need to be in service of the community as an artist. When I think, sometimes you think, what's my value here? Especially in modern Western culture, sometimes the artist's value may be questionable. It's hard to understand what's the point. And certainly the school system has a fair share to do with it. If they're going to drop something from the curriculum because of budget issues, it's always art first.
Absolutely.
And whenever I do an artist in residence project with a school system, I remind everybody that the purpose of art isn't to train future Picassos. It's whatever field you're going to walk a path towards, you by having the visionary skill set, which is essentially the process we're talking about here, you're allowing innovation to come through, whether you're a doctor, an accountant, a dentist, an engineer, it doesn't matter. Where does that innovation come from? We could be talking about this process, and without vision, societies perish, as quoted by others. And I'm sure, and I'd like to hear if you can relate to this. I certainly feel like the calling has never been stronger, that what our culture needs right now is access to the resonance of the heart. And that our purpose as artists is to share and generate this resonance into our communities and into our cultures, where it seems like there's almost a need for this in a nutritional form. There's a malnourishment of the heart. I see that the consequence of being malnourished of the heart could be things like the excessive aspects of anxiety and depression and fear. When I look at those symptoms, I go, that is a malnourished heart, or a heart that's closing. Yeah. And I feel that every day. And for me, the great training, my intentional mindset is to see how my heart is doing every morning. Okay, do I need to massage it open through whatever protocols we might have? And it sounds like your cello is the de facto protocol in your case. What would you say that your motivation or the purpose when you pick up your cello, how do you see the value in terms of the relationship to the community you're living in? Like, how do you see the global aspect or relationship to what you're doing?
Well, I wanted to go back to what we were talking about earlier and just say that everything that I said about the process and the phenomenon or the phenomenological process is leavened by the playing of the cello. It is the slayer, okay? And it just slays you. It will slay you when you're high. It will slay you when you're low. And it will slay your ego it'll just slay it. Right? There are times when it will incinerate it and demolish it, and it will leave you wrecked, but transformed.
This is you speaking personally. Is this personally?
Yeah, this is right. And then that's performance slaying. Then there's practicing slaying, which I'm now really getting into. But the motivation remains the same, which is to share, to transmit, and to share the felt vibration of compassion, right? What it really feels like, not as the word, not as the political word it once was. Now it's sort of overused.
Right.
It's meaningless, right? It doesn't mean anything. It's like, oh yeah, it's compassion. So they used to call it compassion fatigue, right? It doesn't mean anything, but what it feels like is everything. Right. And it's some mixed between or of love and sorrow, right? And joy. It's those three. And the sorrow comes from sorrows in one's own life, but it also comes from an empathy, an empathic connection for the sorrow that each of us care. I don't care who you are. You're carrying some kind of sorrow, right? Masked in most of the time, right? And what we're sort of honing in on is there's no place, there's no public square to express these kinds of things anymore. We're not really in expression mode anyway, because we're too busy expressing through our phones, which are marvelous, but they're not yet serving as compassion transmitters. That's coming, right? So part of the new invention of what's happening sonically with what I'm able to do now in the recording studio is to create. The one thing I was never sure after we did the recording in the cave, and it was so tripped out. Imagine what we experienced in the studio times, Googleplex. I mean, it was completely bonkers. I didn't know, and we'd taken all the right steps to record it with the omnidirectional calibration mics, the whole thing. What I didn't know was, could you put the bourbon in the bottle? Could you capture it onto a CD? And one of the biggest questions was, how do you capture the silence that we experienced? And I thought about it, and I thought, how do you do it? How do you showcase, how do you embody silence on a recording?
Right.
And the solution that arrived was you use crossfades between the tracks so that the ear never stops listening to the sound current. And then you start the CD with a sound that nobody has any preconceived notions or judgments about, which back in the day, that was the case. Nobody knew that we had used a very particular crystal toning bowl. So it has this sound that comes out of silence, and it's just a nice, warm, open sound. That wasn't in vogue. People didn't do sound baths and that kind of stuff 20 years ago. It was just starting. So nobody knew what that starter sound was. And then you get to hear the Dalai Lama's voice praying in Tibetan, which was like magic. Then he speaks in English and says, now the time has come. It's time to come together. It's time to get it together. And then you hear the long opening cello solo and in the Abbey with the 5-second reverb, and you're like, okay, here, I don't know what this thing is, but we're going on the trip. So the new project that I'm developed and is about to go to market, called Omnisonics with an X at the end, was specifically commissioned to create an 8-hour suite to accompany a journey in the clinical setting of psychedelic medicine, microdose psilocybin.
Incredible.
And so, so we caught the lightning in the bottle, and now I just see it's sort of limitless, because you get to a point with any craft where you've got enough of the elements mastered, right? Maybe some of them more so than others, but you've got enough of it that you can render your design in a way that has impact. But you've essentially got the formula that, if you adhere to these particular guidelines and protocols, you are going to create something that transmits that feeling of compassion, love, sorrow, and joy.
Amazing.
Like heaven.
And would you say that your experiences referencing from the cave recordings till now allowed you to technically find the process to capture the resonance that's being emitted from your instrument in such a way that the recording now today, with I guess we even have the spatial audio components and various headphone technologies, that I mean, I can't wait to hear this, because you're literally talking to very current interests. I mean, they've been long-standing interests, how plant medicines can support the neural evolution of our brain structure and aid in the development of our consciousness. I mean, there's no shortage of fantastic studies being done where PTSD type traumas and various other circumstances from depression and you name it, with extraordinary success through the microdose protocol. And are you feeling, because the live experience, but being present with the instrument, and people who have been present, like myself, I've experienced it firsthand. So the question now is, how do you feel about the technology that we have today in capturing it, and with this new 8-hour recording, what's it called again?
Omnisonics, Sonix.
I can't wait to hear that. And will it be, so the first question is, are you able to feel that recording 8 hours of captured sound, do you think it gives an accurate experience, reproducible experience from the live? Like when you compare it, that's the first part of the question. And the second part will be, how do we get access to hear this and utilize it? Because that's what I'm
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. There's no question about it. And that was, again, when you have experienced something live that didn't get recorded for whatever reason. Sometimes the machines go down because the consciousness just overloads them. And then it's like, oh, God, that actually happened. I'm talking tail out of school here. When we did the very first session, the Omnisonic sessions, when I went back through Kentucky, where I'm from, and I called up two of my guys that I had recorded a solo CD and one that played on the Compassion CD, an incredible electric guitar and folk guitar player. But I hadn't spoken to one of them in 30 years. The other one I hadn't played with since the Cave in '99. Okay. But I knew they had the vibe, and I just called them up and like, okay, here we go. So we got to the studio that was being run by another friend and longtime colleague who I hadn't seen in 30 years, who had recorded stuff for my first album. And we sit down, the vibe is present. We lay down this, killer 40-minute track. Okay. It was just awesome.
Oh, I want to hear this.
Yeah, well, so do I. And,
I see where you're going.
My buddy at the console, he turns around and he goes, and he was playing ambient keyboard, so he was multitasking, and he says, I forgot. He says, I've never done this before. He said, I forgot to hit record. And you talk about a gut punch.
Oh, yeah.
You talk about, and if I had let it knock the stuffing out of me, the project would have collapsed. right?
Right.
It was kind of like if I hadn't hit it in the cave with that invocation, we wouldn't have had 5 days like we did. It just, you had to uncork it that way. And
Right.
so I just looked at him and I said, let's do another one.
Right. That one was
And
the gift
that
for the
was,
gods. That was
that's
the
right.
offering.
Totally. And then Bruce, who was on electric guitar, he was like, yeah, this one would be even better. I was like, awesome, man.
That's the attitude. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's no question that given the technology, all of the evolution and advancements since 20 years ago, and obviously the mobility to not have to go into Capitol Records and not have to go to the Village Recorder,
right.
which would be awesome. But that's a whole nother kind of thing. And so the intimacy of the space, the right equipment, the space has to have a good acoustic signature, obviously, and then let the magic flow. I now feel as comfortable now in the recording studio as I do on the stage. And that's taken me 30 years to get to that point. Right. And I've done a lot. I've done I mean, I don't know how many performances I've done, how many times I've been on a stage. It's thousands. How many times have I been in the studio? It's in the hundreds. Right.
Right.
But now I feel just like when we did the session at Earthstar. I feel very much at home right away. The vibe was there right away, and off we went.
And do you think that the current state of technology in recording capture sense can do justice? Because I know, we're not talking just about sound in terms of, I mean, we're going beyond musicality here. We're talking about resonance that can influence and shift consciousness ultimately. And I'm speaking from having a firsthand experience of that with you, from the way you deploy your golden cello. So is that capability being manifested through the recording process? Like that's fascinating to me. Because the presence of your spirit in that moment, you're not there live, let's say with me, if I go and listen to the recording a week later, but is it necessary? Can the technology reproduce that, since it is simply frequency on one level, right? What's going on? What do you think about that from your experience?
There's no doubt in my mind it can. And I've got, I've got like sonic evidence for it, and an eight hours.
Right.
We actually have 16 hours. There's another 8 in the can.
Amazing.
And it was a complex mix. It was a complex. Well, I'm not even sure that it was. It was a sophisticated mix. My mixing engineer is a fellow named Sean Boyd, who has Art Farm and the Catskills in New York. Is just, I mean, I had to weigh in one time and just say, hey, could you raise the highs just a smidge once? Okay. And we sat at the board for 2 months. So
amazing.
it was a joy, but he was in the consciousness.
Right.
Right. So there was never a separation at any phase from the capture to the mix to the mastering in which it was out of phase. Okay. The only things that were out of phase when I thought, Jesus Christ, how am I going to listen to all this stuff? This is 16 hours. It was enough to play it. And then I have to go back and start to figure out where the edit points and all the rest of it, and what became clear immediately. And this was a phenomenon that I did not experience when we mixed the Compassion CD, which was much more of a complexified soup of strange sounding Tibetan chant. Gregorian chant, which we had orchestrated, fusion music, standard sacred instrumentals, spoken word, sound effects, thunder, stuff, and batteries of percussion and Tibetan longhorns. I mean, it was apocalyptic in its scope, right? And we felt at times we were at the apocalypse and we weren't going to survive it. It was quite a challenge. And then what was the sequence? So that was a whole thing that it was a puzzle. It was a Rubik's Cube. This was different in that the sphere that we were in had by definition needed to be a sphere that had almost a lava lamp kind of pulsing to it, but that it was designed to not go too far out, because we're mindful that there's going to be a patient in the clinic on an 8-hour psilocybin journey, and you can't send them down through different avenues of, anything that is going to cause their mind to start thinking. B, that's going to take it. So it can't sound too familiar, yet it has to sound familiar enough, right? But it can't start to go avant-garde. It can't get experimental. It can't get edgy.
Right.
Okay?
You don't want to provoke their musical interest palette, because
that's right.
Right.
It is I never thought of it this way, but they are actually taking a sound bath, which is more like a sound flotation tank bath.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So just to pull that thread all the way through, the complexity of omnisonics was in its simplicity. And so what happened as I started, I always like to do this. I like to spot check through the material. And I had 8 hours. So I thought, well, let me just spot check it, right? Wherever. And wherever I went in the drop the needle with the cursor, it was in its hole. The hologram was there.
Incredible.
Right? And then in the few instances, there was a couple takes that I recall that simply weren't in the hologram. So I just left them out. But fundamentally, out of the 16 hours that we recorded, I don't want to over exaggerate this. I would say realistically, 15 hours were in the hologram.
Wow.
Okay.
I believe it.
that was really exciting, artistically satisfying, creatively exhilarating. But then the test always is, does it work well on a Monday morning? Right? Does it work well the day after the Super Bowl or the late night party at the club? Or does it work well when you come home from the club? Does it work under any circumstance? And to my ear, which is going to savage something if it's off, I just can't tolerate it. It's just partly my training and partly my grandmother's influence of really listening to the pitch and the sound particles. If it creates that bodily response of like, yeah, man, that feels like really good. The minute I start to listen to it, I start to feel really good. Right? If it can do that to me, because I tend to be, my energy can get like, when you get into a performance energy and you've got to fill a 5,000 seat or a 10,000 seat or 50,000 seat space, your energy expands. It's just the nature of the gig, right?
Right.
And so learning to be calm in the center of the storm, Omnisonics has empowered me to be much more calm in the center of the storm. But as I've watched, and I've shared it with people selectively, and the benefactor who's very tuned in, had founded the first psychedelic medicine company called MindMed. And he was the one that commissioned the 8-hour suite. His opening take after he put the headphones on and heard it, he heard it live. He said, "Who needs drugs when you've got music like this?"
Well, this is an auspicious alignment, because I am not often the kind of person who's very involved in investing protocols. However, the day MindMed went public on the stock exchange, I bought some stock because of my admiration and belief. And it's so interesting to hear that the founder of that is the patron of this project.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's really incredible, and I love the words you use, man. Sound
Mm.
particles, holograms. I mean, these are great portrayals of the possibilities with music, and you really show an optimistic view of technology because so often, especially right now, all these technological advances are what everyone's afraid of so often in the conversation. And to see how you're utilizing technology to the benefit of humanity is amazing. It had me thinking when masters roam the earth, if we talk to just reference some classics like Buddha or Krishna or
Mm.
Christ, you
Mm.
know, to get a piece of that wisdom or insight or resonance, you had to be within 20 feet of the guy,
Right. That's exactly right.
and if you to hear him. And if you weren't, you got it through secondhand,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
we know what happens there.
Sure.
You say a sentence and pass it along by verbiage. By the time it reaches the seventh person, it may be something completely different. So there's nothing like hearing it from the source,
Hmm.
and the fact that essentially what you're describing is the technology is there now to capture something that values the subtlety of the resonance,
Hmm.
to perhaps contribute to the transformation of our collective consciousness. It's really it's an exciting time to be a creative, I would say, who can access these tools. I can't wait to hear this project, man. Omnisonics with an X. That
Right.
that's amazing. I can't wait.
Thank you. Well, so it's coming soon. We should have, we're manufacturing it two ways. One is um, in a new, it's the size of a DVD package, except it's not a plastic case. It's a nice, beautiful, high gloss cardstock with the artwork on the cover. And on the inside, when you open it, there's not a CD in it. It's a little slot, and you pull it out, and it looks like there's a business card. And flipping out of that is a USB that you just simply connect in, and that gives you 100-minute suite, which is that we're making available for the public. Or if you wanted, you can download it. We're setting up all the Spotify's and Bandcamps and all that stuff. And then
Amazing.
for the 8-hour suite, which is going to be licensed to clinics and spas and hospitals and so forth, that's a different mechanism where we have conversations and then set up the ways for the clinic or the facility to download the 8 hours. And that's all been part of the puzzle that we figured out. And it's exciting. I just want to say one last piece of it, because I mentioned the sequence from the recording to the mixing. The mastering engineer is the legendary Rob Fraboni,
Mm.
who was the sound engineer on Martin Scorsese's The Last Waltz. He built Shangri-La Studios for Dylan and the band, redid the basement tapes, remastered the entire Bob Marley catalog for Chris Blackwell at Island, and remastered U2's Joshua Tree, and is Keith Richards' personal engineer. And so his ears then came into the mix.
Amazing.
And then it was like, oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. So
I'm
I've heard this thing go through an evolution from pre-mix, mix, and then mastering with Rob's secret sauce called Real Feel. And so we've got a through line, to go back to your technology piece, that is synchronized. Well, the resonance field, right, is it's aligned at every step of the project process. And then the last thing I just wanted to say was the technology that anyone has access to right now. But I'll just say the technology that we've had access to through Omnisonics and everything else that's coming is altered by the bow moving across the string of the cello. And because it's able to create microtonal frequencies, people often talk about oh, 432 is the right pitch resonance for A, and oh no, such and such is the heart chakra. It's like, yeah, but these are not static frequencies, right? They just aren't. And it's, I know this is true because they've measured it, that the frequency of the stones resonate at 432 inside of the King's Chamber in Giza, right? Because that was the valence back then, right? And so if I were to go in there, the last thing I'm going to do is tune down my A string from 440. Actually, I go to 441, which apparently John Lennon pushed it to 442, which is really interesting. I like more of a shimmer on the note, on the upper partial. But the last thing I would do is tune my cello down to 432, because my cello at 432 sounds sick. Okay, the wood does not vibrate at that resonance.
Wow, I love that level of awareness to your instrument. That's an extraordinary detail.
Well, so just to push it through, then my job is to start to play in the King's Chamber. All of this is going to happen because I'm determined to get in there, and somehow it's important. I don't understand it. It's just a calling. I will start to play, and it'll be nice to have one or two of the Omnisonics musicians in there with me, because, on keyboards, because we can really resonate the space. But we will find the inner resonance, right? And adjust to it without adjusting our own devices, right? And so but the microtonal transmitting capacities of, I'll just speak about the cello, both on the golden cello and then the 5-string electric cello, which we haven't even talked about, which is it's a whole nother thing, right? But it's because of the bow, it's because of the old technology marrying with the new technology that this third voice can emerge.
The old technology merging with the new technology. I mean, you're intriguing me. Can you help open that one up a little bit? What do you mean about that?
Well, just the fact that the cello is a 400-year-old invention. So at that time, I mean, it's still state of the art. You cannot improve on a cello or a violin. You cannot make it better. They mastered the form 400 years ago.
Right. That's cool.
That's insane.
Yeah, that's a very cool detail. Right.
Okay. So to marry that ancient 400-year-old sonic technology,
got it,
which is alive. It came from a tree. It's organic. And it does have metal strings, and but it's wood, right? And but not to discount, electric guitars have wood, keyboards have organic, minerals and stuff that was mined. It's all stuff from the earth.
Right.
Unprocessed.
In its original molecular structure. Right.
Yeah, and then the sound, the reason we all felt the way we felt at your home studio space and then in the Earth Star studio space was because the sonic field of the heart got activated, and then it just learns. At that point, all I have to do is keep playing, keep my heart as open as possible, keep my mind as focused as I can,
right,
and just trust that it's like it's doing its thing. Kind of like dolphins when they use their sonar to scan your body when you're in the water. You feel it. It's not some imaginary thing. You feel it, man. It's a trip.
Are you speaking from experience?
I'm speaking from limited experience.
Right. So, because I've never heard that before. That there's what is that? Yeah. That's amazing. I know that they deploy sonar and that it has an extraordinary range capacity, but I didn't realize that there was accountability, that you could feel that in the water. I guess it's because it's resonating through the water system. That's
literally sound vibrations are pushing the water.
Amazing.
Right. I mean, to say it's just science is to say it's just science. Right. That is the scientific fact of the matter. Just the same way that if you get your vibrato vibrating at 7.8 cycles a second, you're going to synchronize with the Schumann resonance waves around the planet, and the dolphins and the whales communicate at that same rate of 7.8 cycles a second. So now you're synced in. You
Right.
can't sync out.
Right.
I mean, and why would you?
Right, and I think it was I never remember Miyamoto, a Japanese scientist from the
Dr.
early
Emoto. Emoto.
right,
Yeah.
who linked consciousness or thought to physical molecular changes that he did, right, with a microtelescope in water and
Yes.
right. So we have that evidence.
He froze water crystals, and at the exact moment that he figured out this process to do it, at the exact moment that the molecule was freezing, the person involved with the experiment sent it a thought. It sent it a love thought. It sent it a hate thought. It sent it an anger thought.
Right.
And the water molecules all reflected in a visual rendering what love looks like, a multi-petaled lotus.
Right.
Anger looks very upset.
Right.
Almost, and it's like, I don't know. How can you explain that?
Right.
That's the only way to explain it, rather than to poo-poo it. The easiest thing to do is dismiss it as quackery.
Right.
But the scientific experiments occurred, and that's what they demonstrated. So my interpretation as a musician and as an aspiring artist is to say, well, obviously consciousness is affecting the water molecules. Right. Like, and wouldn't that make grand design sense? What an elegant thing to do.
Right.
Just like people talk to plants. I've been toning to plants, which has been really interesting, and they love it.
Now, what do you mean by toning? You're toning to plants. What's that? What's going on there?
Well, like if you do a toning, I've got to be a little bit surreptitious now because my mail carrier is arriving. Heaven forbid he should see me out sitting under the tree doing toning. Give me a second. Well, if you do harmonic vocal toning, and I'll demonstrate it in a second once my guy leaves the package, which is awesome. These are new DiMarzio cables for the 5-string electric quarter-inch cable, so it's a big day.
It's always Christmas with Amazon.
Well, it is very true. But when you do this harmonic overtone, it's toning more than singing. There's a phenomenon that occurs where, if you remember the old Aretha Franklin, is it live or is it Memorex?
Right.
There's a phenomenon when everything will resonate in the dominant sonic field. So I'll just give a brief example. Or words to that effect.
Wow. So when you're toning, so you're referring to a process where you're not even using the cello. You're doing something with your own voice, and you're around something like plants or trees in a natural environment, and that tone that you just picked consciously is it a tonal range? Like, why that frequency and not a
I don't know.
Right, so that's just what happened now.
That's just what happened now.
I see.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of, you could say, protocol that you integrate as a way to harmonize yourself with your surrounding when you feel inspired or intuitionally provoked to do so.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right, amazing.
And it's what happens is after you do it, it excites. I don't understand, biochemically exactly what it's doing, but it seems to excite your auric field around your head, right? Because that's what's vibrating the most when you're making the tone. It's vibrating, the whole nasal cavity, skull cavity. I mean, it's really doing it. But then
Right.
I've never. I think it's synchronized where then your perception, your visual perception is different, but you also get the sense that the tree beings or the plant beings, that they hear this stuff. They're aware of it. They feel the vibration, and then it looks like I'm looking at the trees right now, and they're it's like they're watching, like they're listening. They seem more alive, and
Right.
my perception is they're just sitting there holding the space, waiting for us humans to like acknowledge their beingness. And when we do,
yeah, right.
then they are pleased. They're happy.
Right, right. It's as
Yeah.
if consciousness is experiencing itself through your co-relationship or presence with it. It's almost as if the consciousness, like we have a cerebral cortex, and then you see a plant that doesn't, but yet through some dimension of the consciousness, it's perceiving itself by your perception of it.
Mm-hmm.
And and connecting through this dynamic of resonance. It reminds me of the yogic masters going back thousands of years who defined the frequency of the cosmos as Om and used that mantra, right, to in a circular recitational fashion to, I guess you could say, harmonize into a state of unity consciousness with the whole. It sounds like what you're saying is essentially you're describing this principle in a way.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's exactly it. Analogous to it. And then if you extend it, which goes back to the motivation, if you extend it to just resonance theory, it's the old Coca-Cola commercial. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. If we could just, nothing really needs to be done. This stuff is going into the airwaves already. It will just spawn. It's just the law of nature.
Right.
And my commitment, which is not going to change, is to bring forth as much of it as possible. Because ultimately, I want to share what I'm experiencing when I'm playing with everyone else.
I love it.
Because that's the only time when I feel completely connected to everything and everyone. Right?
You really presented at the heart of what it means to be an artist and why we're here and what we're doing. It's been amazing connecting with you. I've loved this. We've been an hour plus conversation. It's been really beautiful, man. Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you
sharing.
No, thank you.
Any closing thoughts? I mean, we've touched so many aspects of this whole thing. I'm wondering if there's anything left to squeeze out of the sponge.
There's just one quote that I like to share from Pablo Casals, who is considered the greatest cellist of all time. He's the Gandhi of cello, and an extraordinary career that spanned from playing in the Teddy Roosevelt White House to the JFK White House. It was just epic. They asked Casals at age 94 why he continued to practice 4 hours a day, and he said, "Because I'm finally starting to hear some improvement."
Beautiful.
And that's pretty much the way it feels,
Right.
Yeah, in a good way.
Beautiful. No, it's true. I remember my Shaolin teacher saying to me when I was just beginning that you could start at age 4 and train for 100 years and you still would just be, scraping the surface of what there is to discover.
Totally.
Yeah, and that was a kind of attitude of a lifelong journey of exploration to grow and evolve. And I guess that the popcorn trail of what we do in pursuant of such an endeavor should, in hope, inspire those who cross paths with those popcorns that we leave behind in the form of our creations, and that they may be a resonant reflection of this epic journey that we take courageously, because you have to be quite courageous to live such a journey. So, Michael, thank you so much. It's been an amazing pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Gregory. Likewise.
I'll be seeing you soon in LA. I can't wait for round 2.
Another rumble. Okay, man.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.